Hello everybody, Ron Salter here with Salter Racing Engines, and by popular demand I'm going to do a little more in-depth on the electrical part, but please watch to the end because got some interesting demonstrations for you that I think you'll find shocking, and I hope I don't today, but I just may, never know, so stay tuned. Alright, so the other day I made a video about grounds and how important they are, and today I'm going to go a little in-depth, a little more in-depth than what we did the other day. So you heard me mention that I teach electron theory and not the conventional theory, and I'm going to tell you the exact reason why. Okay, here's the main reason. There's a couple main reasons. That's why I grabbed a few of them, because I knew this was going to do that. This is going to be a picture of a diode. All right, there we go. That's a good marker there. All right, so I'm sure you guys have seen diodes in circuitries and stuff like that. This is a diode. And what this is telling you, a diode, by the way, is designed to only allow current to flow in one direction, okay? Basically, what it's telling you is current cannot flow that way. The arrow against the wall means electricity will not be able to travel that way. It can only travel this way. Okay? Now, the electron theory. It says that flows from negative to positive. Okay? If you take your multimeter, in order to test the diode, you have to put the black lead here, oops, and the red lead here, and you will get continuity through the diode. If you put the red lead over here, it will be infinity. It will not read. The diode will do its job. Why? Because the diode stops current flow this way, allows current flow this way, and if the electron theory is true, and I believe it is, then the black will be on this side sending it that way to the red. Now, the other reason is because another thing that I think you'll find very interesting, and you can do this at your house, is the very battery itself. All right, so let's take a battery here. We got a negative, we got a positive, and here this wire goes out. We have our ground hooked to the negative, okay? That battery, by all sense of the imagination, is dead if that wire is unhooked. You can go out there to that vehicle, race car, whatever, and lay an iron pipe from that terminal over here to the chassis, anywhere you want, on the frame, on the engine block, anywhere you want, lay a wrench across it from hot to frame, hot to chassis, and nothing will happen. And I know you're thinking, oh, that's not true, it's going to blow up, it's going to weld the wrench, it's going to spark in my face. No, it won't. Negative. If that negative is not hooked up, that battery is dead. Therefore, it has to start here. Goes here. Of course, the plates, you got to, you know, chemically creates a voltage going in that direction. Okay? That's why I teach electron theory, because for all intensive purposes, the DC flows from negative to positive. Notice that I said DC. Why did I not say there's two theories with AC voltage? Because there's not. AC voltage creates its own ground. In America, it's 30 times a second it creates its own ground because it has a frequency of 60 hertz, which means it goes from positive to negative 60 times a second. Now, if you have an oscilloscope or a graph, what you will see is 0 volts, negative, positive, and you will have a sine wave like this with AC voltage. Alternating current. It alternates between positive and negative. Now, in America, we use 120 volts in our wall outlets and 220 volts for a little bit heavier equipment, and I'm talking about residential, at 60 hertz. 60 cycles, okay? Because the current is constantly changing from positive and negative, that means in some point there's a dead spot. It also means at some point it's higher than 120. So what you have is called RMS voltage. And at the top of the sine waves, it's actually about 169 volts, give or take. And what we're doing is taking that average of 120, 110, whatever it is at your home in the wall. So I didn't know if you knew that or not, but I thought that's an interesting tidbit for you. Now, with that being said, there is no theory, electron or conventional theory, with AC voltage because it creates its own ground, and that is also why it's extremely dangerous, okay? It's extremely dangerous because it does not need a designated ground. It's searching for the quickest, smoothest path to ground it can find. It does not care that you don't have this particular wire a certain place or this particular wire so tight. If it sees that that path is easier to ground, it's going there, and if it happens to be through you, so be it. That's why Thomas Edison didn't want to use it. But DC voltage requires such heavy gauge wires to travel long distances and things like that. It just wasn't economically feasible, so we went with AC voltage. Anyways, just a little tidbit of information for you. Now, we're going to get to the real reason I'm making this video. So let me get rid of this, and I'm by myself today, so I'm having to work everything. Okay, folks, I apologize. I had to stop for a minute. Somebody was staring at me through the window, and I couldn't focus like that. All right, so anyways, this next thing I want to show you is a test light. If you've never used one of these, this little baby can be one of your best friends when it comes to diagnosing. And I'm talking about even misfires. Remember earlier when I said electricity always wants to find the easiest path to ground? What if I was to tell you that if you had a ignition wire, and remember, in racing you're dealing with very high amperage, well, on a lot of the racing you're dealing with high amperage boxes. Some of them are just, you know, your HEI stuff or typical Ford equivalent. But if you're dealing with MSD boxes of 5, 6 amps or 40 amps or whatever, there's some high amperage, and it's trying to find the quickest way to ground. What if I told you this test light could be your best friend trying to find a ill-running race car or performance vehicle? I'm going to show you how this works. So what we're going to do is, obviously with a test light, you have one end that's designed to be grounded. The other end is basically an ice pick with a light bulb in it, okay? Really trick an old guy showed me back when I was a teenager. I'm going to take this test light. I'm not going to poke the wire with it. What I'm going to do is put a very small pinhole right in the top of this rubber boot. I'm not poking the wire, not damaging the wire in any way. I'm just poking a little tiny hole in the rubber boot. And if there is any kind of, you can see I barely came through. we know that the other end of this wire is hooked directly to the spark plug. It is snapped on tight. And this wire goes into the distributor cap or a coil pack. And this test works on anything that has a wire. What if I told you that even though this is snapped onto the plug wire and snapped into the coil or the distributor cap, that if there's high resistance in the circuit, I can get this thing to jump outside of that wire just by getting my test light close to it. You say, well, what does that prove? If that happens, somewhere between the coil or the cap and the plug, I have high resistance. And I will change the wire and the spark plug when that happens, cap and rotor too if I have that. The other thing that can cause a misfire is a very lean air-fuel mixture. I don't know if you know this or not, but how many of you knew that pure water does not conduct electricity? Now before you call me crazy, it's true. Pure water will not allow electricity to travel through it. You say, well then how does that people get electrocuted from being in water? Because of the minerals. All right? When you go to a plating company such as gold plating or something like that, you will see that they have these multiple evaporators set up, and they will take the water from the faucet, from the city or town, and they will boil that water by using a vacuum. The water boils from a liquid to a vapor. The vapor then recondenses over into another pot, and then that is done probably multiple times. What's left in the chamber is all the minerals that was in the water, and what goes over into the new chamber is just pure water. That pure water is now put into a bath, and then they add salts to the bath, such as cobalt or gold plating salts or cyanide or whatever it is they're using, because when they plate stuff, they use an electric current. If there was any minerals in the water, the minerals will be plated to the part. And I know for a fact that the pure water itself will not conduct electricity. It's a very, very poor conductor, as long as there's no minerals in it. So, with that being said, when we're talking about spark plug firing, the air-fuel mixture has everything to do with how well the spark plug can fire and how well the flame front is able to be produced. If you have a very lean mixture, you don't have very many fuel molecules for the spark to jump from one to the other. Remember, I said in the video about combustion chambers that it's not an explosion, it's not a ba-boom, it is a like this. So it is almost like little tiny miniature fuses, those fuel molecules. And when you have the perfect air-fuel mixture, the flame front travels from molecule to molecule to molecule. But when you have very lean mixture, the molecules are too far spread apart, and so you'll get a misfire. It's not a dead cylinder, it's just not as strong as the others. And those things can be caused by a bad injector or a vacuum leak on that cylinder or something like that. One of the hardest things to find, and it's not really hard I don't find it that hard, but if you're new to this kind of thing, you might find it extremely difficult to diagnose a vacuum leak, especially if it's not making any noise. Because you can get a misfire that's all over the place. It's not one cylinder, it's all of them. And they're not necessarily miss. It is sporadic. Especially if you have a newer car and you're looking at it through a scan tool, and you got misfire number 7, misfire 1, misfire 8, misfire 3, misfire 5. It's just all over the place. There's a really good chance you got a pretty serious vacuum leak. It could be internal, where the vacuum leak is under the intake. Or it could be internal, where you have a plastic intake manifold that's cracked. And in a race car, you could have loose carburetor flanges. I've seen where the base plate of the carburetor came loose and sucking air between the main body and the base plate. I mean, I've seen all kinds of problems, okay? Cracked intake manifolds. A lot of times, one time we had internal vacuum leak where it pulled the intake gasket up from the bottom of the intake manifold, and you couldn't see it from the outside. So we pulled the breather off the valve cover, and sure enough, it pulled the toilet paper in the valve cover. So there's your vacuum leak right there. And we also had a little oil consumption and a little bit of smoke out of the exhaust, but from the oil it was pulling out of the lifter valley. But anyways, when you have a lean mixture, it can be difficult. This test light can be your best friend. I'm going to demonstrate to you how to use the test light to do a cylinder power balance test. Because sometimes on high performance, loud, high compression, big camshaft engines, it can be hard to necessarily pinpoint which cylinder it is that ain't quite right. We're not talking about valve adjustments being too tight or valve adjustments that's just way too loose, because one that's way too loose, you can generally hear it, and one that's too tight will sometimes give a popping noise out of the exhaust, you know, low compression because the valves aren't sealing. Sometimes you can go to the header and do a heat test with a heat gun, but sometimes none of that is available to you, and you just have to do a power balance test. And a power balance test is basically where we eliminate one cylinder at a time to see how much work that cylinder was doing. So if I pull off or cancel one plug wire at a time and I'm listening to the drop of the engine, I can hook a vacuum gauge to it to see how much each cylinder contributes vacuum-wise. I can look at the tachometer and see how much it's dropping per cylinder on the tach. Or I can just play it by ear and say, oh man, that cylinder right there is definitely not doing much work. If I cancel a cylinder and no change, then it's not running on that cylinder. Pretty simple. If I cancel a cylinder and there's a little change, and then I cancel another cylinder and there's a lot of change, well then the one that's a little change still isn't firing 100%, and I need to investigate it. And these tools make it super easy to do that without getting shocked by a high amperage box. Now again, I want to point out, I'm not damaging the wire in any way. You cannot even see the pinhole that I put in this wire. So I'm going to show you how that's done, and then I'm going to show you a couple other uses for this test light. So please watch the video to the end. All right, hang tight. Okay, I had to come outside here, so I want to give you a little bit of premise as to what we're doing this. This is a 79 Mustang that belongs to somebody really close to me, and no, it's not mine. And they put a newer fuel system on it, and it's a project that they work on when they have time. So what I'm going to show you, and by the way, this is not an HEI, or excuse me, this is not MSD. It does not have the high amperage. It is a stock Ford ignition. We're going to crank this thing up, and then we're going to, as you can see, we're grounded our test light, and then we're going to do a power balance test, and we're going to see if we have high resistance on this ignition circuit just by holding the test light a little bit away from each wire to see if we get an arc come through. Okay? It's a really good tool for you to, when you're trying to pinpoint just weird running problems. And then I'm going to show you one more thing that's so helpful. All right, so hang on. We're going to crank this thing up. Oh, by the way, it's very loud, so that's why I wanted to talk now. Okay, you can see this is surely a project, no doubt about that. All right, let's see, here we go. We're in neutral, fuel pump on, ignition on, start. Oh, she's a little cold. Oh yeah. Here we go, let's go check it. That's on that circuit. Now I'm going to show you how to do a power balance test. Here it killed that cylinder. Okay, so you saw the demonstration there, and I didn't get shocked, and of course you're not going to get shocked. It's very safe, and like I said, it's a really good way to see if you have a high resistance, whether the wire's melted or whatever the case may be. Now I'm going to show you something else. How do you know if you got a good battery? Watch this right here. If you have a good battery and the car's been ran recently, when you walk up to that battery, you should get 12.6 to 12.8 volts, all right? Let's see what we got here. Now, we are good here with that. Next thing I want to show you is on a lot of this fuel injection stuff, a lot of the stuff is 5-volt reference. Now, what if I were to tell you that you have way more voltage than that going to the ground? Watch this right here. Let me turn the meter right here. All right, so I'm just on the plastic case, and we got, there's 1.5 volts. Look over here, I done some checking earlier. 7.57 volts. Let's see. And there's a 2.3 volt. You say, what are you doing? I'm just touching the case of the battery. Folks, you've got acid that leaks out of these cells, and that acid is a conductor. It's carrying voltage on the skin of your battery, runs down to the frame and runs up the grounds, and it back feeds into your electronics. And so when you got sensors that are 5-volt reference, and you got, sometimes I've seen as much as actual battery voltage on the ground. Now there's no amperage on it, but if you got 10, 11 volts back feeding up your sensors, you're going to have some issues. It can give you false check engine lights. It will certainly kill your battery because it's a drain. These are things you want to absolutely make sure your battery does not have, especially if you're trying to do any kind of performance racing or stuff like that. And this is a great thing to check on your modern automobile. Get something, remember battery is acid, so get something alkaline and wash it off. Make sure you dry it so that there's no bleed going into your grounds and no bleed that will cause a drain on your battery. Now, I don't know how loose this is. Let's see if I can get, probably not loose, but I'll just show you this. One thing, if you've got a drain and don't know why or where it is, take your test light and take your negative cable off and go between the cable with one end of your light and take the alligator clip and go to the other end of the battery. And if that thing lights up, you've got a drain. Okay, make sure you're not checking with the interior light on, doors open. You can then start unplugging one fuse at a time until you find the circuit that that drain is on, and then figure out why it's doing that. Fix it. Really good little tip for you. All right, guys, hang tight. Okay, something else I wanted to show y'all was when you ohm out or when you suspect you have a bad ignition circuit, understand there is two parts to an ignition. There's primary circuit and there's secondary circuit. And from the key switch all the way to the coil itself is the primary circuit. The secondary circuit is everything from the coil all the way down to the spark plug. So whenever you suspect a bad component, such as, for example, a bad wire, hey, Sweet Pea, you're going to have to let Pa work a minute. Hang on. My granddog wants me to hold her all the time. Whenever you're checking a wire you suspect it's bad, remember, digital volt ohm meters or digital multimeters, they're a little slow, so you have to give them time to give you a reading. So clip on to one end of your wire, make sure you're good on the other end, and what you need to do when you're testing a wire for a break in it or too many ohms, too much resistance, move it slow, like so, and give the meter time to recover so that you know that you're getting an accurate reading. Now, why would I move it like this? Well, because the way the wires are made and manufactured, they can have a bad spot in them, but when you bend it a certain way, they're making contact. And if there's any fluctuation in that meter at all, throw the thing out. It's no good. Also, I'm going to show you a really cool trick I learned a long time ago about if you suspect a bad or a cracked spark plug, how to find it. I've got a plug here. I'm going to bring it up to the camera, and I'm just going to take, I purposely put this here, some black grease, and I want to show you a really cool trick to find a crack in the porcelain when you can't see it. Simply take the grease, let me come stand here where I can see what you're seeing. Make sure that's focused there. Simply take the grease and just rub it around on your porcelain. And voila, that crack will highlight itself for you. And there it is. Now, I purposely broke this one to show you, but every time when you got a cracked porcelain, you can't see it, get some grease from the car, smear it around the porcelain, and it will show up like a bright light. And it will save you some heartache before you install these new plugs. And if somebody drops the spark plug on the concrete, especially if it's going in a high output engine, just throw the thing away and get another one. It's just not worth the headache. Okay, well, for this episode, that about wraps it up. And I don't know if I'm going to put this at the beginning or the end, but if it's at the beginning, please watch all of it. There's demonstrations all throughout this video. Don't forget to subscribe, and when the little website where you can buy things is out, please stop by and pick you up something. Thank you so much for your support. Have a great night.